Imagine pouring your heart into a book, knowing it could cost you your reputation, your safety, and even your life. That's exactly what George Orwell faced while writing Animal Farm in 1984. But here's the twist. His fight for truth didn't just make him enemies. It put him under government surveillance, got his work rejected, and left him utterly isolated. The very system he sought to expose tried to silence him. Why would someone risk everything for words on a page? The answer might shock you. Orwell's life wasn't just about writing novels. It was about exposing the dark truths most people were too afraid to confront. But doing so meant walking a path riddled with rejection, betrayal, and physical suffering. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden struggles that define George Orwell's life, from being blacklisted by publishers to living under government surveillance, all while battling a deadly illness. By the end, you'll see why Orwell's fight for truth was as painful as it was inspiring. If you're fascinated by stories of resilience and the cost of speaking out, subscribe now for more deep dives into the lives of history's most misunderstood figures. Now, let's dig deeper into Orwell's relentless pursuit of truth and the price he paid for it. During World War II, Orwell's Animal Farm, an allegory exposing the cruelty of the Soviet regime, should have been an instant hit. Instead, publishers shut their doors, terrified of upsetting Britain's ally, the USSR. One publisher admitted they'd been pressured by the government to reject the book. Orwell was furious. To him, this wasn't just a rejection of his work. It was a betrayal of the very principles of free speech and democracy. He believed censorship wasn't something that only happened in dictatorships. It was alive and thriving in the so-called free world. Still, Orwell didn't back down. When Animal Farm finally saw the light of day in 1945, it became a sensation, but not without consequences. Many intellectual circles turned against him, branding him a traitor to socialist ideals. The backlash wasn't limited to words. Orwell's relentless critique of propaganda and political corruption caught the attention of MI5, Britain's intelligence agency, which kept him under surveillance for years. His phone calls were monitored, his movements tracked, and every interaction was quietly scrutinized. All because he refused to stay silent about the hypocrisy he saw. What's one truth you'd risk everything to speak out about? Share your thoughts in the comments. But Orwell's struggles weren't just political, they were deeply personal. Let's look at the war that nearly cost him his life in Spain. In 1937, Orwell joined the fight against fascism in the Spanish Civil War. At first, it seemed like a noble cause, a chance to stand up against tyranny. He aligned himself with the POUM militia, a socialist group opposing Franco's forces, and threw himself into the chaos of battle. Orwell was not a soldier by nature, but he believed so deeply in the fight against oppression that he was willing to put his life on the line. But what Orwell hadn't anticipated was the bitter infighting within the anti-fascist forces themselves. Soviet-backed communists saw POUM as a threat and began targeting them with purges and false accusations. Orwell found himself caught in a web of betrayal, labeled a traitor by the very people he thought were allies. One night, Orwell and his wife Eileen were forced to flee Spain under the cover of darkness. He left behind comrades who weren't so lucky. Many were imprisoned or executed. The experience shattered his faith in political movements, leaving him disillusioned and mistrustful of ideologies on both the left and the right. This disillusionment became a recurring theme in his later works, particularly Animal Farm and 1984, which warn of the dangers of power, propaganda, and blind loyalty to any cause. If Orwell's courage during the Spanish Civil War inspires you, hit the like button and share this video with friends who'd love to hear about his story. But Orwell's battles didn't end there. Let's rewind to a time before he became a household name, when he chose to immerse himself in poverty to understand the struggles of the working class. Orwell's journey began in the late 1920s in Paris, where he lived as a dishwasher, scraping by in the grimiest corners of the city. This wasn't a romanticized version of bohemian life. It was sheer survival. He described it vividly in Down and Out in Paris and London, recounting how he worked 18-hour shifts in filthy kitchens, cleaning endless piles of greasy dishes, the smell of rotting food, the sweat of overworked laborers, and the constant ache of hunger were his daily companions. His meager pay barely covered a bed in squalid hostels filled with bedbugs and rats. The walls of these rooms were so thin that he could hear every cough and groan from his neighbors, fellow workers drowning in the same despair. Orwell's health began to deteriorate even then, as malnutrition and exhaustion left him gaunt and frail. When he returned to England, things didn't improve. Orwell wandered the streets of London, disguised as a tramp to experience life on the margins firsthand. He slept in shelters so decrepit they reeked of mildew and despair, surrounded by men who had lost everything. Meals were scraps discarded by the wealthy or served in charity soup kitchens. This immersion gave Orwell the material he needed to write honestly about class inequality, but it came at a steep cost: his health, his comfort, and for years, his financial stability. Have you ever had an experience that completely changed your perspective? Drop it in the comments below. Finally, there's the heartbreaking cost of Orwell's unyielding dedication to his craft, his health. Tuberculosis, the illness that ultimately claimed his life, followed Orwell for years. But even before that, his body was worn down by the harsh conditions he had subjected himself to. By the time Orwell retreated to the Isle of Jura in the late 1940s, he was already in poor shape. The isolation on Jura was relentless. No heating, no nearby medical facilities, and bitter Scottish winters that chilled him to the bone. Despite all of this, Orwell pushed himself to complete 1984. He believed it was his final chance to warn the world about the dangers of authoritarianism and the manipulation of truth. His urgency was palpable. He typed feverishly on a clunky typewriter, coughing violently between sentences and pausing only to take injections for his worsening tuberculosis. Friends begged him to stop, but Orwell refused. To him, the message of 1984 was too important to wait. When the novel was finally published in 1949, it became an instant classic, but Orwell paid the ultimate price. Just months later, he succumbed to tuberculosis at the age of 46, leaving behind a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of power and truth. Even the most powerful words can come at a devastating cost. Orwell's commitment to truth wasn't just a literary pursuit. It was a battle that consumed his life. If these stories moved you, subscribe for more incredible deep dives into the struggles of history's most iconic figures. Their legacies remind us of the cost of courage and the enduring power of their words. Stay tuned for the next story.